Sonic is hard. Let me rephrase that a bit. Sonic games are hard to get into. If you've ever seen footage from a convention where a Sonic demo is out, you see people who are generally struggling to play the games.
So I missed.
But when you listen to people who've been playing these games for a while, you get the idea that these games are just really easy. From enemies that don't even attack you, to absurdly easy S-rank requirements. It's almost like these games don't present a challenge at all. But then we come to certain games like Sonic Unleashed or the Final Horizon DLC for Frontiers that have even Sonic fans screaming about the difficulty. Well, what's causing all this inconsistency, and how should the difficulty in Sonic games be handled in the future? That's what we're going to answer today. But before we get started with that, if you wouldn't mind, please subscribe and leave a like. It really helps out with the content so I can keep making these videos. From the very beginning, the difficulty in Sonic games has been handled very differently than most other games on the market. You're not going to see your typical Dark Souls Balania boss fights, but the classic Sonic games have their own idea of difficulty and they blend it together with replayability. Classic Sonic games would put a bunch of obstacles in your way and challenge you to memorize the level design in order to get through them quickly. If you play the level enough times, you would be able to memorize the layouts, find all the enemy placements, and be able to use that to your advantage to perform skips and play through the stage faster. This was balanced out because the obstacles in these stages were never the most challenging to get through, so if a newer player got stuck, they wouldn't have the hardest time getting back on track. This in turn played in with the tiered level design system of the classic Sonic games, where the higher path would be harder to reach, but would usually be faster. However, that wasn't always the case, there were some exceptions. While the lower path would be more platforming focused and reserved for players who failed to get up on the higher path initially. And one thing these games do masterfully is that they show you which path you could have taken if you fell on the lower path. You see what you could have done better, and you want to replay the stage to get up on that higher path. And this philosophy persisted throughout. Even in games like Generations, which are so far removed from the classic formula, you can still see this in effect. Like in Green Hill Zone, if you fall behind and take the slower path, you can see the faster path in the distance way in the level background. And these are the principles of Sonic difficulty for the most part. What they encourage is replayability and memorizing the stage layouts to get better and faster with every attempt, while also showing you what you can do better. And this is most often referred to as easy to learn, but hard to master. Chasing that one perfect run of your favorite level can be really enjoyable. Seeing yourself perform skips that you previously couldn't, theory crafting ways to get around the level faster, it's some of the most enjoyable gameplay out there. It can give you the same rush as defeating a difficult Dark Souls boss for the first time, while at the same time being accessible to newcomers. This system sounds pretty much perfect. It's a great way to handle difficulty. But what ended up going wrong? To start, let's talk about the newer footage from all the demos for Sonic X Shadow Generations and Sonic Frontiers where people kinda suck at the games. Why is it that these people are having such a hard time playing the games when hardcore Sonic fans think that this is some of the easiest Sonic gameplay we've seen in a while? Anyone who's been playing these games for a while can easily get through Frontiers Green Hill Zone without problems. And I feel this comes down to one main thing, that being that Sonic, despite the original intentions, isn't very intuitive right now. When the intent of the original games was to be easy to pick up and play, why is it that new Sonic games aren't that intuitive to pick up and learn the controls of? And I believe this comes down to two main things. First, Sonic Team is kinda bad at designing tutorials. In SA2, for example, after you were introduced to a new power-up, you got an opportunity to use it before being tested on it in a more strenuous situation. But then as we moved on, we got games like Sonic Lost World that didn't teach you anything about their core mechanics. A casual player never gets a clear idea of how to use the parkour system, and then there's the infamous kick attack that you need to defeat those spiders in Silent Forest. Sonic Frontiers hides a key mechanic for its final boss behind 100%ing the DLC that the boss is in. And this also goes the other way around, because in Sonic Frontiers you have access to an easy mode. Sounds great, right? The accessibility option is right there. But what this easy mode does is removes any sort of input from the game as you just homing attack chain through everything. So you don't have an opportunity to learn anything about how to play the game, you're just offered the answer to everything. There are numerous other issues like this that prevent the games from being easy to grasp but hard to master. The other reason for this is that Sonic is fundamentally different from most other platformers on the market. From his very conception, he was meant to be different, an alternative to Mario, an alternative to standard platforming. And despite how easy it is for some of us to grasp these concepts, the concept of pressing one button and seeing Sonic blast off and then having to react to all these obstacles can be hard to learn. And in times where you have more freeform movement like the adventure games, it's challenging to think of ways to interact with the terrain to be able to skip portions of the level. So while the obstacles themselves aren't really challenging, it's much more so challenging to figure out how to control Sonic through them. And this is why a lot of newcomers to the series seem to struggle with picking up the games. So we've talked about what makes Sonic games hard to get into for newcomers, but why are Sonic games so easy for people who've played the series? At least it seems like it recently, with a few exceptions. One of the biggest critiques of the meta games was simply that they were just too easy. Sonic Colors, Sonic Generations, Sonic Forces, and even Sonic Frontiers before Update 3 were all short and simple to get through games. But if these games are so easy, does that mean they removed the satisfaction of getting better at the game until you get that one perfect run of a stage? Well, the long answer is no, they haven't. These games, aside from Sonic Forces at least, while they do make it easier for the players to get through the games, they still have a sense of that perfect run, especially in Sonic Generations. Despite Generations having one of the worst ranking systems we've ever seen in the series, it's still fun to replay the stages. So even though the game doesn't expect much of you to reward you with a good rank, you still feel like you want to play the stages. And what the game does to encourage this is show you the paths you could have taken, like in Green Hill Zone, while also adding little in-game incentives for playing better. You can skip over a harder platforming section that would have taken more time, and some of these alternate paths just look cooler to take and are just generally faster. So these games are still replayable in spite of Sonic Team's attempts to make them much easier for newcomers to get into because of the aforementioned reasons before. It's obvious that their goal is to make Sonic more generally accessible to everyone, but it's hard to tackle the heart of that problem without making Sonic more of a general franchise, stripping him away of what makes him unique. In that sense, I don't envy Sonic Team at all here. It must be really hard to make a balance of replayability and accessibility, as Sonic is seemingly one of the hardest series to find that middle ground of difficulty for. The Final Horizon DLC for Sonic Frontiers is a perfect example of this. They went in with the goal of making it harder because Sonic fans were complaining that they'd gotten too easy with the base game of Frontiers. But with this goal, they came across a whole host of other issues that involved artificial difficulty, like the frame-perfect parry not being designed for the boss's attacks, or the new Guardians like Tank that spam your screen with attacks, not to mention unsatisfying, very precise platforming. But in this same DLC, Sonic Team demonstrated the two extremes that they have to go to try and balance the game, as they made the DLC easier, but in turn made all the Guardians two-shottable, and the aforementioned easy mode still exists, allowing you to easily homing attack through all the platforming. So we've pretty much established what went wrong and what we need to do to fix it. We need to find a way that makes it easier for new players to get into the series, while also keeping the same replayability and level of difficulty that makes it fun for older players. And I think the solution has been right there under our noses the entire time. I believe that Sonic Team needs to make better use of difficulty options. Now, before Frontiers and Forces, we really only had hard modes that would increase the difficulty of the levels. But with Frontiers, the concept of an easy mode became fully realized. Unfortunately though, the easy mode in Frontiers kinda sucks, because it just lets you bypass all of the game's content. An easy mode should really entail more accessibility options, so maybe quick respawns off of a platforming section that will allow you to get right back into the action. If you fail a section enough times, you could be directed to a tutorial for how to get past it. Frontiers already has the training simulator, so why not just make it a mandatory pop-up if you fail a section enough times? These small changes would encourage learning the level design and learning how to play the game over just getting through it with homing attacks. This, in my opinion, is the best way to make sure that Sonic games are accessible to everyone while also retaining the same level of challenge and replayability. As right now, I feel what Sonic Team is trying to do is to overcorrect for the current consensus. That's gonna be it for me. Davron, signing off.